General Motors temporarily shutting down more than half of its plants in North America.
General Motors plans to close its plant in Lordstown, Ohio.
General Motors didn't just make a mistake. It built an engine so flawed that it punched a hole straight through the company's confidence, burned through cash, and sent quiet shockwaves through boardrooms and shop floors alike. Engines start seizing. Dealerships get swamped. Behind closed doors, emergency meetings drag late into the night as managers try to understand how a problem this big slipped through a system built on precision. This engine was supposed to be a centerpiece of GM's future lineup, a workhorse that would power trucks and SUVs for years. Instead, it became a warning siren. Analysts, watching the recall costs mount and customer anger spread, began using a word no major automaker ever wants circulating around its name: insolvency. And here's where it matters to everyone else. When a giant like GM stumbles this badly, the damage doesn't stay inside corporate walls. Prices rise. Repairs take longer. Trade-in values slump. The shock spreads out into neighborhoods, small shops, and ordinary drivers who have never set foot in a GM office. All of it started with an engine that failed at birth. In the lab where new engines are tested, one unit went onto a vibration rig, the kind of sensitive test bench that can detect imbalances too small for the human eye to see. On the surface, that engine looked brand new and flawless. Clean intake ports, fresh pistons, no scratches, no obvious marks. But the moment the test began, the reading spiked into the red. What should have been a routine verification turned into a hard rejection. The machine didn't see a minor tolerance issue. It saw something fundamentally wrong with the rotating assembly. Engineers who had spent years trusting GM's machining standards stared at the data in disbelief. This wasn't just a little out of spec. It was so far off that the only answer was to pull the engine out of circulation on the spot. The unit was scrapped. On paper, it was just one engine. But it was also a clue that something much deeper was broken. When they dug into the measurements, the picture got worse. The overall surface of the crankshaft journals looked acceptable by one metric, but another measurement, the height of microscopic peaks and valleys, was way out of line. Zoomed out, the metal looked smooth. Zoomed in, it looked like a tiny landscape of ridges and trenches. Those sharp microscopic peaks act like sandpaper. Instead of letting a smooth film of oil glide between the crankshaft and bearings, they tear at that film and strip it away. Every revolution becomes a small attack on the engine's internal surfaces. From a distance, GM had built a modern, high-tech engine. Under a microscope, it had violated basic rules of how metal surfaces and lubrication are supposed to work together. And that was only the beginning. That roughness didn't stay harmless. It triggered vibrations. Those vibrations fed into wear, and that wear set up a chain reaction that a warranty department could never fully outrun. By the time the data made its way up the chain, it was already clear. This wasn't a single defective unit. The same pattern was lurking in a huge number of engines already shipped, installed, and driving on public roads. But the rough surface wasn't the only problem. The real disaster began when that flawed metal met moving oil. And once those two factors combined, GM's internal crisis exploded into something much larger and far more expensive than anyone in that test lab imagined. The next piece of the puzzle came from the way oil moved through the engine. Inside the L87's crankshaft, the passages and chamfers, the beveled edges where oil enters and exits, weren't just slightly off. In too many units, they were opened up in a way that let oil escape sideways, bleeding pressure away from where the bearings needed it most. On a perfectly machined surface, a tiny dip in pressure may not cause immediate damage. But pair a fragile oil film with those microscopic ridges carved into the metal, and every brief loss of lubrication becomes dangerous. Inspectors opened failed engines and found bearing surfaces marked with wave-like patterns. Physical evidence that oil wasn't flowing smoothly, but surging and collapsing over and over again. The lubrication system was constantly trying to catch up, trapped in a losing battle that played out thousands of times per mile. Then the failures left the test bench and showed up on real roads. Early production engines began locking up without warning. Some died in driveways. Others shut down on highways. Technicians at dealerships started seeing the same internal damage repeating itself. The message they sent up the chain was simple and terrifying. These engines don't just need repair. They need replacement. But replacements weren't ready. And that's where the mechanical disaster turned into an operational one. On the executive floor, the tone shifted from concern to panic. GM's leadership had handled recessions, supply issues, and market shifts before. But this was different. The problem wasn't a foreign competitor or a sudden drop in demand. It was their own process, their own engine line, undermining them from the inside. Internal reports laid out machining defects, oiling problems, and inconsistent quality across plants that were supposed to be synchronized to the millimeter. It became obvious that this was not just a single engine program in trouble. It threatened timelines for multiple vehicles and platforms that depended on that powertrain. Inside the company, arguments broke out. One camp pushed for a bold recall strategy: confront the issue, replace as many engines as possible, and hope that transparency would limit long-term damage. Another camp worried that fully admitting the depth of the defect could shake investors, trigger credit downgrades, and open the door to a financial spiral. While executives debated, the crisis kept spreading outward. On the factory floor, the first sign something was wrong wasn't a press release. It was silence. A production line that normally thundered with conveyor noise and tools suddenly stopped. Workers stood next to half-assembled engines that would not move forward. Supervisors walked the aisles with tight faces, giving vague reassurances they didn't really believe. Everyone on that floor understood one thing: an unscheduled stoppage rarely ends with a simple restart. Rumors spread faster than parts ever could. Was it a bad shipment? A recall? Were layoffs coming next? For many families in the surrounding communities, that plant wasn't just a workplace. It was the anchor of their local economy. The moment that line stopped, so did their sense of certainty. Outside GM's walls, the trouble then hit the next link in the chain. Suppliers, foundries, machining shops, and small manufacturers that fed parts into GM's engine plants were suddenly told to slow or stop shipments. Pallets piled up at loading docks. Forklifts idled next to stacks of crankcases and components with nowhere to go. For small shops that rely on steady volume, even a short interruption can be brutal. Cash flow thins. Schedules break down. Managers start quietly planning furloughs they hope won't turn into permanent cuts. And as suppliers felt the strain, the pressure rolled onward to the place where drivers experienced the crisis face to face: the dealership service bay. Tow trucks started lining up before the doors even opened. Technicians worked through lunch, but the pattern on their work orders didn't change. Engine failure, engine failure, engine failure. Customers wanted answers: loaner vehicles, buybacks, anything that would restore their trust and get them back on the road. But service departments were trapped between two hard realities: corporate silence on one side and furious local communities on the other. Every day brought more broken engines and fewer replacement units to install. Then the story jumped from parking lots and service lanes to the one place where outrage spreads faster than any official notice: online. Videos of stranded trucks, SUVs on flatbeds, and drivers describing engines dying out of nowhere started going viral. Social feeds filled with photos of dashboard warnings, smoke, and stalled vehicles. Supporters of the brand began to turn into critics. What had been isolated failures suddenly looked like a pattern no one could ignore. Forums and comment sections filled with people comparing notes: who had the same engine, who was still waiting on parts, who'd been told, "We'll call you when we know more." The backlash didn't stay local. It grew into a nationwide conversation. And it was only a matter of time before another powerful group took notice: the people who watch numbers, debt, and risk for a living. Because once Wall Street, rival automakers, and foreign competitors realized how deep this failure could cut, the crisis stopped being just a recall and started looking like an opening. By the time viral videos of dead engines and overloaded dealerships started circling online, the crisis had already moved into a much colder arena. Financial markets. On trading floors, the reaction didn't start with shouting. It started with quiet hesitation. Analysts refreshed recall numbers, repair estimates, and production forecasts. They watched how much cash would be tied up in fixing engines, compensating customers, and restructuring supply chains. The word bankruptcy didn't arrive in headlines overnight, but it began to appear in internal notes, cautious briefings, and private conversations. Major funds, banks, and pension managers started to reassess their exposure. If the recall expanded, if replacement parts stayed scarce, if customer trust continued to collapse, then GM's credit lines, debt ratings, and long-term stability could all come under pressure. Investors don't just look at one company. They look at the entire system around it. If one of the biggest automakers in the world stumbled hard, it could drag confidence in the wider sector down with it. Shares that had once been considered safe, long-term holdings began reacting with nervous, jagged movements. Bond markets, usually slower to panic, started reflecting the same doubt. And while markets worried, GM's rivals moved. Fast. Ford and Stellantis spotted the opportunity immediately. Their sales and marketing teams shifted gears almost overnight. Incentives hardened. Fleet deals were restructured to tempt businesses that were suddenly unsure about renewing contracts with GM. In regions hit hardest by engine failures and delays, sales reps showed up with targeted offers: trade out of your troubled vehicle, step into something stable. At the same time, rival companies quietly began recruiting frustrated engineers and managers from GM, offering fresh budgets, cleaner programs, and a chance to escape the chaos. But the most strategic moves weren't just coming from across town. They were coming from across the ocean. Chinese automakers had spent years preparing to expand globally. Now, they saw a rare window opening. Companies like BYD and SAIC intensified exports, pushing aggressively into markets where supply gaps were forming. They didn't need to beat GM in a straight fight. They just had to be ready when customers went looking for alternatives. Their message was simple: available now, reliable, and priced to undercut familiar brands. As more of these vehicles rolled into foreign showrooms, analysts started to piece together a bigger picture. This wasn't just a recall story anymore. It was beginning to look like a shift in global automotive power. Exactly the kind of shift that unnerves politicians as much as executives. That's when Washington stepped in. Lawmakers called for hearings. Regulators demanded documentation. Officials wanted to know how an engine defect had cascaded into production stoppages, supplier distress, and a potential opening for foreign rivals to gain ground inside the U.S. market. Behind closed doors, conversations turned tense. Should the government monitor the situation more closely? Step in if jobs or strategic supply chains were threatened? Push back harder against aggressive foreign expansion? What began as a mechanical problem had become a national concern. Meanwhile, the impact on ordinary drivers was becoming impossible to ignore. New vehicle prices crept upward as inventories tightened. Insurance companies, responding to increased risk and repair costs, adjusted premiums on entire segments. Repair waiting times stretched from days into weeks. Families had to rearrange work, childcare, and daily routines around cars that were suddenly unavailable or unreliable. Used car prices climbed as people scrambled for any dependable vehicle at a reasonable cost. For lower-income buyers, the squeeze was especially harsh. What had started deep inside an engine plant ended up reaching people who had never thought twice about surface roughness values or oil channels in a crankshaft. The shock then radiated out even further. International suppliers who depended on steady orders from the U.S. auto sector felt the slowdown as well. Steel mills, electronics plants, and logistics hubs from one continent to another began cutting overtime, delaying expansions, and revising forecasts. Shipping routes that were once full started showing gaps. The global economy doesn't move in straight lines. It moves through chains. And GM's crisis had just yanked a major link. All of this left one burning question hanging over General Motors. Could the company adapt fast enough to survive in a world that was already pivoting to something new? Electric vehicles, automation, and digital mobility platforms were no longer distant concepts. They were the battlefield of the present. GM tried to reposition itself, signing battery partnerships, revisiting autonomous projects, and outlining new strategies for the next decade. On paper, it sounded like a reinvention. In practice, critics wondered whether it was innovation or desperation. Foreign competitors pushed ahead with their own breakthroughs. Other American brands seized on their rivals' misstep to win over customers and talent. Some experts predicted GM would claw its way back and use the crisis as a turning point. Others saw a slow, drawn-out decline. No one could say for sure which ending would be written. But one fact was impossible to ignore. The future of mobility will belong to the companies that learn fastest from their failures and change before they're forced to. GM's billion-dollar engine disaster is not just a story about bad machining or flawed oil flow. It's a warning about what happens when a single critical weakness travels outward through factories, families, markets, and entire economies. Now the real question is, what do you think? Is GM on the edge of a comeback, or are we watching the early stages of a long collapse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious where you see this story going next.